When a single dad ties his daughter's broken bike together with nothing but string and patience, a rich woman watching from her car window offers him something he never expected, a job that could change everything. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The air was thick with summer heat, the kind that made the park feel like it had been wrapped in a wool blanket and left to simmer. Children's laughter drifted through the trees, mingling with the creak of old swings and the rhythmic thump of basketballs on pavement. Beneath the shade of a crooked oak tree, Michael Turner knelt beside a tangled mess of bent spokes and a broken chain. Emily's pink bike lay sideways on the grass like a wounded animal, its streamers limp, its front wheel wobbling from an earlier collision with the curb. Emily, all elbows and scraped knees, stood nearby clutching a half-melted popsicle, her brow furrowed as she watched her dad work. Her helmet sat crooked on her head, one strap still undone. "It's okay, sweetie," Michael said, his voice calm and even, though sweat was gathering at his brow. "I've got this." The toolbox hadn't made the trip to the park. It was supposed to be a day off, a rare one, just bikes, snacks, and laughter. But here he was, fingers black with grease, using a frayed piece of string he'd found in the trunk of the car to hold the bent wheel bracket steady while he tinkered. He didn't grumble, he didn't complain, he just worked. With practiced hands and a patience honed from years of fixing everything from beat-up pickups to leaky faucets, Michael tied the string around the loosened bracket, then looped it twice around the frame. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold, for now. Emily crouched beside him, popsicle now forgotten. "Will it work, Daddy?" He looked at her, her cheeks smudged with dirt and hope. "Well," he said with a small grin, "it won't win any races, but it'll ride." She squealed and threw her arms around him before hopping back onto the seat, wobbling slightly as she tested the pedals. The bike creaked, but it moved. She zoomed off with a triumphant laugh, circling the park like nothing had ever gone wrong. Michael stood slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans. Across the street, behind the tinted window of a sleek black car, Serena Westbrook watched. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't see a mechanic. She saw something far rarer. The engine purred quietly beneath her, barely audible over the rustle of leaves dancing in the breeze. Serena Westbrook sat behind the wheel of her imported SUV, fingers resting on the leather steering wheel as her gaze remained fixed on the man under the tree. She hadn't meant to stop here. Her GPS had glitched again, rerouting her off the main road. But then she'd seen the flash of pink, the small figure with messy braids, and the man kneeling beside her with a piece of string like it was the only tool in the world he needed. Serena had watched them from the shaded interior of her vehicle, her windows tinted enough to offer anonymity, her life insulated behind glass and leather and the hum of constant control. She was supposed to be in back-to-back meetings today, branding strategies, acquisition reports, investor calls. But here she sat, 20 minutes behind schedule, watching a stranger fix a bike with more tenderness than most men gave to things that cost 10,000 times more. The man didn't shout or rush. He didn't check his phone. He didn't seem to be in a hurry to be anywhere but where he was. Kneeling beside his daughter's bike with a soft kind of focus Serena hadn't seen in a long time. There was something raw and honest about it. She didn't know who he was, this man in worn jeans and sun-faded boots, but she could see the weariness in his shoulders. Not the kind that comes from inconvenience, but the deep, constant kind. The kind that belongs to people carrying more than their share without complaint. His daughter, Emily, she heard him say, watched him with wide, admiring eyes. When the bike moved again, her laughter broke through the air like a chime, and Serena felt something tighten in her chest. It was unfamiliar. She should have driven off. She should have been halfway back to the city by now, but she didn't move. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her polished nails tapping idly on the gearshift. This man didn't know she was watching, and for the first time in a long while, Serena Westbrook wasn't thinking about profits or press releases or the next quarter. She was thinking about him. The sound came sudden and unfiltered, bright, high-pitched, full of life. A giggle so honest it felt like sunshine cracked through the window and spilled into the cabin of Serena's SUV. She wasn't expecting it. She had been adjusting her phone, toggling between emails and calendar reminders, trying to remind herself that this detour was temporary, that she had places to be, that she didn't have time to sit in a parking lot and observe strangers like they were part of some afternoon movie. But Emily's laughter stopped her cold. Serena's finger hovered above the screen as the little girl looped around the tree, legs pumping furiously, the fraying pink streamers on her handlebars catching the light. Her father stood nearby, arms crossed, a rare smile softening his face. The bike made a faint clicking sound as it moved, a protest of old parts held together by the thinnest of string, but it carried her just fine. And Emily laughed again. Not the polite kind of laugh Serena heard at galas or business dinners, not the laughter that people performed for cameras or social gain. This was the kind of laugh that didn't know the world could break you. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere untouched. Serena felt her throat tighten. It was ridiculous. A child's laugh, a man's makeshift repair, and suddenly she felt as if something inside her, something she'd locked up years ago, was stirring. She hadn't heard laughter like that in a long time, not since her younger brother had pushed her on a swing, until the rope squeaked and the sky felt too close, not since her mother danced in the kitchen, spinning with a wooden spoon, flour dusting the floor. Those days were buried under decades of suits and schedules, of losses too old to name, and victories that always came with a price. And yet here it was, this single sound, cracking through her like a match against dry paper. Serena looked down at her phone again, screen still lit. Meetings, money, strategy, then back at the girl on the bike. And for a fleeting second, she wished she could trade it all for that laugh. Michael was brushing off his hands when he heard the footsteps, soft, measured, not from the direction of the playground or the parking lot, but from somewhere closer. He turned instinctively, expecting another parent or maybe a curious child. What he saw instead was a woman far too polished for this part of town. She wore a cream-colored blouse that hadn't wilted in the heat, slacks that looked like they'd never met a grass stain, and heels that shouldn't have survived a gravel path. But what struck Michael wasn't the outfit. It was the way she walked, like someone used to people moving out of her way, like someone who didn't ask questions unless she already knew the answer. She stopped a few feet away, offering a polite smile. "That was impressive," she said, motioning toward the now-functioning bike where Emily rode in lazy circles. Michael squinted up at her, wiping his hands on the hem of his shirt. "It's just string, nothing fancy." "Still," she said, "you made it work." There was something in her tone, not praise exactly, but curiosity, like she was cataloging him for reasons she hadn't yet explained. He stood slowly, brushing his palms together. "You need a bike fixed or something?" She hesitated, then extended a hand. "Serena Westbrook." He looked at the offered handshake, then met her eyes. "Michael Turner." He took her hand, firm and brief. "I run a community center downtown," she began, pulling a card from her sleek leather bag. "We've got a shed full of broken bikes. Most of them just need some attention. A few, maybe a miracle. But I'd like to see what you could do with them." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a job?" Her lips curved into something just shy of a smirk. "Let's call it a trial. A couple of days. If it works out, maybe more." He looked down at the card, then back at her. "You always walk up to strangers in parks with job offers?" "Only the ones who fix bikes with string and make kids laugh like that," she said. And for once, Michael didn't have a comeback. The card felt heavier than it should have. Just a small piece of paper, crisp and expensive, Serena's name embossed in soft silver at the top. Michael turned it over in his fingers as he sat on the worn bench outside their little apartment, the hum of a distant lawnmower and the quiet chirp of crickets rising with the fading light. Emily was inside, humming to herself as she colored, the scent of peanut butter lingering from dinner. A job offer, just like that, from a woman in heels and power, from someone who lived in a world Michael couldn't afford to dream about anymore. He'd been out of steady work for 4 months. The last shop he worked at had shut down unexpectedly. No severance, no warning. Since then, he'd been picking up odd jobs, fixing lawnmowers, unclogging gutters, doing tune-ups in parking lots for cash. It kept the lights on. Barely. And now this, a trial job fixing bikes for a community center. It sounded simple. Honest work. Work he was good at. But something about it made his gut twist. Michael rubbed his jaw, staring at the sky as dusk painted it lavender. Pride had a funny way of sneaking into the room even when it wasn't invited. He didn't like handouts, didn't trust charity wrapped in polished smiles, especially not from people who had clearly never had to choose between paying rent and filling a gas tank. And yet she hadn't looked down on him. Not exactly. She'd watched, spoken calmly, like she saw something worth trusting. That unsettled him more than if she'd pitied him. Still, the job meant stepping into her world, even if only for a few hours. It meant opening a door he wasn't sure he wanted open. He glanced toward the window where Emily's silhouette moved behind the curtain, her small hand pressing shapes against the glass. He exhaled slowly. The truth was, he didn't have the luxury of pride anymore. But distrust? That was harder to put down. The card rested on the bench beside him like a quiet dare, and Michael sat there in the half-dark, knowing he was running out of reasons not to call. The morning started like most others, too early, too fast, and already behind. Michael scrambled eggs with one hand while buttoning his shirt with the other, half listening to Emily talk about a spelling bee she wasn't sure she wanted to enter. She was still brushing her hair when they dashed out the door, her backpack half zipped, and one shoelace trailing behind her. It wasn't until he returned home, kitchen quiet again, that he saw the lunchbox, bright purple, with faded stickers and a zipper that stuck halfway closed. Sitting untouched on the counter like it knew it had been forgotten, Michael stared at it for a beat. He sighed, grabbed his jacket, and slipped the box under his arm. The car wouldn't start this morning, not unusual these days, so he walked. 6 blocks, past the corner store, the church with the rusted bell, and the cracked sidewalk that Emily liked to jump over. The air had a bite to it, and by the time he reached the school, his hands were red from the cold. He checked in at the office, explained the situation with a sheepish grin, and waited as a staff member fetched Emily from her classroom. When she appeared in the hallway, eyes wide and cheeks flushed, her face lit up the way only a child's could. "You brought it!" "Wouldn't want you trading crayons for crackers again," Michael said, handing over the lunchbox with exaggerated care. From across the street, Serena Westbrook was seated in her car again, just for a moment, in between meetings. She'd paused to review her notes when she looked up and saw him. No toolbox, no press. Just a man in a fraying jacket standing outside an elementary school with a lunchbox in one hand and warmth in his eyes. She didn't wave, didn't call out. Later that afternoon, a knock came at his door. Serena stood there, no heels this time, just a coat and a quiet smile. "I meant what I said about the job," she offered. "But this time no pressure, no trial. Just come by, fix a bike. Or don't. I just thought you should know. You're the kind of person we need more of." Then she turned and walked away, leaving only footprints and a second chance behind her. The front door creaked louder than expected. Michael stepped into the community center, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and doubt trailing behind him like an old shadow. The place smelled like a mix of gym socks, dry erase markers, and cinnamon from the day-old muffins someone had left in the break room. A receptionist barely looked up as she pointed him down the hallway. "Bike shed's in the back, through the courtyard. Watch out for the middle latch. It sticks." The hallway was plastered with hand-painted murals, bright colors, crooked letters, a sea of fingerprints frozen in time. Laughter echoed from somewhere near the game room. A ball bounced. Someone shouted, "That's not fair." He followed the instructions and stepped into the courtyard, then through a side door that led to what could generously be called the bike shed. It looked more like a junkyard. Bent handlebars, chains that looked like they'd rusted through 3 winters, tires flat and cracked, seats duct-taped together. A unicycle, for some reason, missing a pedal and dignity. Michael stood still for a moment, taking it all in. Then he dropped his bag and sighed. A woman in her late 30s, clipboard in hand, appeared from behind a stack of folding chairs. She had her hair pulled back in a tight bun and wore sneakers that said she'd seen every type of spill imaginable. "You're the guy Serena sent?" she asked, skeptical already. "Michael Turner," he replied, extending a hand. She didn't take it, just gave him a tight nod. "I'm Renee. I run the youth rec programs here. These bikes, well, they're not here for decoration. The kids use them for the after-school ride club, or they did, but no one's touched them in months. We were told someone would take care of it. So, Tag, you're it." "Got it," Michael said, already rolling up his sleeves. From outside, a group of kids pressed their faces to the window, peering in. One of them, a boy with 2 big glasses, whispered, "He's going to quit by Friday." Michael smirked and reached for the first wrench. "We'll see about that." The first bike fought him. The second insulted him. The third surrendered, but only after he used a trick involving a shoelace and a soda tab. Michael worked with his back to the door, bent low, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and hands black with grease. The afternoon sun filtered through the shed's warped windows, lighting the dust in golden streaks. It was loud, kids arguing over snacks outside, a basketball thudding against the wall, someone playing music from a phone with broken speakers, but Michael barely noticed. He was in his element. There was something peaceful about the chaos of broken things. Unlike people, bikes didn't lie. They didn't hide their damage. They just needed patience, attention, and a steady hand. By early afternoon, 3 bikes sat upright by the exit, tires inflated, chains oiled, ready to ride. Michael leaned against the workbench, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag that had long ago given up being clean. He was about to pack up when the door creaked open and a cluster of kids spilled in like marbles from a tilted jar. One boy, all elbows and scowls, pointed, "You fixed that red one?" Michael nodded. "Give it a try." The boy hopped on like he was born to it. One shaky loop around the courtyard, and then he shouted, "It actually works!" Another kid stared up at Michael, suspicious but curious. "What's your name?" "Michael." The kid squinted. "Can I call you Mr. Mike?" Michael paused, then shrugged. "Sure." The name stuck instantly, like a badge of unexpected respect. Outside, leaning just out of view behind a pillar, Serena watched. She hadn't meant to stay. She had meetings, emails. Her assistant had called twice, but something about the sound of the boys' laughter, the ease in Michael's shoulders, the way he spoke to the kids like they mattered, it kept her rooted. He didn't know he was being observed. That made it better. She watched as he knelt beside another bike, showing a girl how to check tire pressure using her thumb and a trick with a paperclip. Serena folded her arms, a small smile tugging at her lips. Maybe he wouldn't quit by Friday. Maybe, just maybe, he'd build something here. Michael wasn't sure what made him say yes. Maybe it was the way Serena had asked, not like someone used to being told no, but like someone trying not to hope too hard. Or maybe it was Emily, who clapped her hands and gasped when she heard the word dinner, as if they'd just been invited to a royal banquet. Either way, they found themselves at Serena's house that Friday night, standing in a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, granite counters, pendant lights, and chairs that Michael wasn't sure were meant for sitting. He felt out of place the moment they stepped inside. His flannel shirt felt too worn. His boots tracked dust across her spotless floor, and he couldn't stop checking to see if Emily had smudged anything with her fingers. Serena, for her part, was trying. She wore jeans and a soft sweater instead of her usual sleek armor, and her hair was down, curling slightly at the ends. She burned the first batch of garlic bread, apologized too many times, and cursed under her breath when she realized she only had 2 matching forks. "It's not usually like this," she said, placing mismatched plates on the table. Michael smiled, easing into the chair with a slow exhale. "Good. I'd be uncomfortable if it was." Emily giggled and swung her legs under the table, fascinated by the tiny bowls of lemon water Serena had placed out for cleaning fingers. "Like at fancy restaurants," she explained, blushing. Dinner was pasta, overcooked but earnest. Serena poured wine for herself and offered apple juice in a wine glass to Emily, who beamed at the presentation. Conversation started slow. Serena asked about the bike shed. Michael answered with one-word replies. Emily talked enough for all of them, describing each kid by name and what they were like, especially the one who called her dad Mr. Mike. By dessert, something shifted. The laughter wasn't forced. Michael leaned back in his chair, and Serena didn't reach for her phone once. As they walked to the car later that night, Emily took Michael's hand and whispered, "I like her." He didn't answer right away, just glanced back at the front door, still half open, warm light spilling onto the porch like an invitation he hadn't known he wanted. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that only crept in after a long day, and a little girl's soft breathing filled the silence from behind a closed bedroom door. Michael sat on the edge of the worn couch, elbows on knees, the flickering light of the muted TV painting shadows across the walls. The wine Serena had sent home with him sat untouched on the counter. He'd told her thank you, smiled when he said it, but the truth was he wasn't ready for that kind of softness yet. In his hands he held the picture frame that never quite stayed in one spot. Sometimes it lived on the nightstand, sometimes on the bookshelf. Tonight, he'd pulled it from the drawer where he kept the things that still ached. The photo inside was simple, candid. His late wife, Rachel, was laughing, mid-sentence, head tilted back just slightly, her eyes squinting at him like she'd just said something she knew he'd tease her for. He'd snapped the picture without her knowing, and she hated it. But it was his favorite. He rubbed his thumb along the glass. "Been a while since we talked," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. There were moments, good moments, like tonight, when he almost forgot what grief felt like fresh. When he heard Emily giggle at Serena's fancy water bowls, and something in him wanted to believe it was okay to smile again. But those moments were fleeting. Michael leaned back, resting his head against the cushion. Rachel had been the one who pulled him out of himself, who believed in every version of him, even the ones that hadn't arrived yet. Losing her had been like someone took the air out of his lungs and told him to keep running. He hadn't let himself get close to anyone since. Not really. Because getting close meant risk. It meant opening doors that grief had closed for a reason. He stared at the photo a moment longer, then gently set it face down on the coffee table. Outside, a car passed by slowly. Inside, nothing moved but the memories. And somewhere deep inside, Michael wondered if the wall he'd built to protect his heart was now the very thing keeping him from feeling alive again. The basement wasn't what Michael expected. Serena had called that morning, early, almost nervously, and asked if he could stop by the center when he had a moment. No details, just her voice, a little softer than usual, and that was enough to get him to say yes. Now he stood at the bottom of a narrow stairwell, blinking at the wide, dusty space before him. Concrete floors, exposed beams, a few broken shelves leaned crooked against the walls, and an old vending machine flickered in the corner like it was trying to remember how to die. Serena was already there, arms crossed, a clipboard in hand. She wore boots this time, not the sleek, polished ones, work boots. Brand new, but still boots. "I know it's a mess," she said as he stepped beside her, "but I see something here, something more permanent." Michael raised an eyebrow. More permanent than a shed with a leaking roof and 12 busted bikes? She didn't smile, not quite. But her eyes lit with that spark he was beginning to recognize, restless vision paired with iron-willed resolve. "I want to renovate the entire space," she said. "Build a real workshop, workbenches, storage, maybe even a classroom space for the older kids to learn maintenance. We've got the funding. I just need someone who knows how to build something that lasts." Michael shifted, glancing at the exposed pipes above. "And you think that's me?" "I do," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But it's more hours, more responsibility, and more pay." He folded his arms, letting the silence stretch between them. "Why me?" he asked finally. She looked around the room as if searching for the answer on the walls. "Because you don't just fix things, you make them better, and the kids trust you. I trust you." That word landed heavier than the others. He studied her, unsure what to say, the idea of building something real, something lasting. It stirred something in him he wasn't ready to name. Serena stepped closer. "I'm not offering a job anymore, Michael. I'm offering a project, something we build together." And in that unfinished basement, with dust in the air and something unspoken between them, he realized saying no might be the biggest risk of all. Michael didn't mean to bring her. Emily had the day off from school, some sort of staff development thing he'd forgotten about until the morning scramble. With no one to watch her and the shop renovation just beginning, he gave in. She promised to behave, promised to stay out of the way, promised not to talk too much. None of those promises lasted past the first 10 minutes. By mid-morning, Emily had pulled a milk crate beside her dad's tool bench and was sorting bolts by size with laser focus. Her legs swung under her in rhythm, and she narrated her process like a TV host. "These go here, these are tiny ones, and these," she paused, holding up a rusted washer, "are probably just trash." A group of kids peeked into the new space, curious. They'd heard rumors about what was happening down here, that the shed was being replaced, that there'd be workbenches and real tools, and maybe even snacks. But what drew them in wasn't the smell of fresh wood or the sight of Michael laying out blueprints. It was Emily. Within an hour, she had 3 kids helping her sort parts, 2 others listening as she explained the difference between the spinny thing and the pokey thing, and one wide-eyed little girl hanging on her every word as if she were the mayor of tools. Michael watched from the corner of the room, arms crossed, a bemused smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Looks like I've been replaced," he muttered. Serena appeared beside him, holding 2 coffees. She handed him one without a word, then nodded toward the growing cluster of kids at Emily's crate. "She's got leadership in her blood," Serena said. "And maybe a bit of marketing, too." Michael chuckled. "She's definitely not shy." "No," Serena agreed, watching Emily show a boy how to use a wrench with more patience than most adults. "She's not. She's something else." And for the first time in a long while, Michael didn't feel like he was navigating the world alone, not with his daughter beside him, not with Serena watching the same dream unfold. Maybe, just maybe, they were building something none of them had expected. The kitchen smelled like smoke, and not the good kind, the kind that clung to your clothes and whispered, "You tried, but you really shouldn't have." Michael stood at the stove with a spatula in one hand and a look of defeat in the other. The pan of what was supposed to be lemon butter chicken now resembled something closer to charred regret. The rice was sticky in the wrong way, and the vegetables had gone from crisp to sad in under 10 minutes. He glanced at the clock. Serena would be there in 20. "Dad?" Emily peeked in from the hallway, nose crinkling. "Is something dying?" Michael sighed, tossing the spatula in the sink. "Dinner." They opened the windows, lit a candle, sprayed something that smelled like pine and desperation. And when Serena arrived, right on time in jeans and a ponytail, Michael greeted her at the door with an apology and a sheepish grin. "I hope you like takeout," he said, "because I tried to impress you, and now my skillet is a crime scene." She laughed. Not politely, really laughed. They ordered from the Thai place 3 blocks away, the one with the slightly sticky menus and the best peanut sauce in town. Emily took charge of setting the porch table, paper plates, mismatched napkins, and the single candle from the kitchen now flickering bravely between cartons of noodles. They ate with plastic forks and bare feet, the porch creaking under them like it was in on the joke. Serena talked more than she usually did, about growing up in a house where no one cooked, where takeout was the norm and silence was expected. Michael told her about the first meal he ever made for Rachel, also a disaster, also salvaged by delivery. Emily interrupted often, telling stories halfway and laughing too hard to finish them. Neither adult minded. By the time the food was gone, their legs were tangled under the table, the sky had gone deep indigo, and Serena leaned back in her chair with a smile so soft it caught Michael off guard. "Next time," she said, "we burn dessert too." And somehow the night felt perfect. Flawed, simple, human, perfect. The reporter showed up with a notebook, a camera, and a smile that was just a little too eager. Serena had arranged it, nothing flashy, just a feel-good piece for the Sunday edition. Local mechanic breathes life into community center, or something like that. She thought it might help secure future donations, maybe bring in more volunteers. What she hadn't expected was how quickly Michael's expression changed the moment the reporter stepped through the door. He stiffened. The warmth in his voice dropped a notch. He went from being the guy showing kids how to grease a chain with a toothbrush to the guy quietly retreating to the back corner, pretending to inventory spare tires. Serena noticed. The reporter didn't. She circled the space asking kids how they liked the new bikes, snapping photos of paint-streaked hands and proud, crooked grins. When she finally made her way to Michael, he gave the bare minimum, his name, what he did, a brief "just happy to help" before drifting away again. After the interview, when the kids had gone home and the room was filled only with dust motes and late sunlight, Serena found him in the workroom, sorting tools like they needed to be organized by emotion. "You okay?" she asked gently. He didn't look up. "Fine." She leaned against the doorframe. "You disappeared back there." Michael hesitated, then exhaled. "I don't like cameras. I don't like attention." "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. He set down a wrench and finally turned to face her. "Because attention comes with questions, and I'm not really interested in explaining myself to strangers who'll forget my name as soon as they hit publish." Serena nodded slowly. "Fair." But something deeper lingered in his eyes, an old scar, not yet healed. And as much as Serena wanted to press, she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she stepped forward, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "You don't have to share anything you're not ready to," she said, "but I'm not a stranger." He met her gaze, quiet and unguarded for just a second. And that silence said more than any headline ever could. The sun was dipping low, casting amber light across the porch as Emily lay sprawled on her stomach, coloring a princess with a wrench in one hand and a bike helmet on her head. Serena sat nearby on the porch swing, sipping iced tea, pretending to read a book that had been stuck on the same page for the past 10 minutes. Michael was still at the center, finishing up inventory with one of the older kids. Emily had begged to stay behind with Serena, something about wanting to show her how she drew bike fairies. Serena had agreed, unsure why the request had moved her the way it did. Emily glanced up from her drawing. "Can I ask you something?" Serena smiled, closing the book softly. "Of course." The little girl's voice was innocent, casual, but curious. "How come you don't have any kids?" Serena blinked. The question landed with no warning, no malice, just pure wonder from someone who didn't yet know the weight behind silence. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Emily waited, her crayon still poised in the air. There were 1,000 answers Serena could have given, some polite, some evasive, some true. But the real one, the one she never said aloud, lived in a locked room somewhere deep inside, full of closed doors, decisions made for her, and a grief that never quite took shape but always found a way to echo. Serena started, then stopped. Emily sat up, brow furrowed. It's okay if you don't want them. Some people don't. Serena looked at her, this little whirlwind of honesty and softness, and felt something tighten in her chest. It's not that, she said finally. I think I just forgot to make space for it. Emily tilted her head. You can still have space. There's always more room if you move things around. The porch went still. Serena reached out and gently tucked a piece of hair behind Emily's ear. Maybe you're right. And in that moment, she wasn't a CEO or a woman with 5 assistants and a calendar that bled stress. She was just someone who'd left a door closed too long and didn't know a child could knock so gently. The boardroom smelled like money and tension, leather chairs, polished mahogany, and the faint, sharp scent of coffee that had long gone cold. Serena sat at the head of the table, flanked by executives in tailored suits and expressions that hadn't changed since the last merger. The projector on the far wall clicked to the next slide, but no one was looking at it anymore. Instead, all eyes were on her. Is it true? Asked Gregory Marsh, the CFO, voice calm in the way a shark circles calmly before it strikes. You've been diverting personal funds to the community center without board review? Serena didn't flinch. She set her pen down slowly and met his gaze. Yes, I used my own money. It's not against policy. Technically, no, came the legal officer's voice, but in context, especially with your name attached, it creates risk, liability, perception issues. Perception, that word again. We're a tech conglomerate, Serena, someone else chimed in. Not a charity. What happens if the press runs a story and people start thinking our CEO's off playing house with a mechanic and a bunch of kids? There it was, the mechanic. Serena felt the familiar burn rise in her chest, the one that usually fueled 12-hour days and ironclad pitches. But this was different. She wasn't angry because of their scrutiny. She was angry because, for the first time in years, she actually cared about something that couldn't be measured on a quarterly report. She stood smooth and deliberate. Let me be clear. I've invested in that center because it's the right thing to do, and because I believe leadership is more than earnings calls and headlines. A silence fell, heavy. Gregory leaned back in his chair. You're jeopardizing your reputation, Serena. She looked at him, voice steady. Maybe it's time I built a new one. And with that she gathered her folder, nodded once, and walked out, heels clicking against the marble like a quiet rebellion. They didn't follow, and she didn't look back. The morning started with frost on the windshield and silence in the cab. Michael sat behind the wheel of his old pickup, letting the engine warm while sipping coffee that had already gone lukewarm. Emily had been unusually quiet during drop-off, still sleepy and wrapped in the scarf he'd knitted her last winter, the one with uneven stitches and too much love. He rubbed at his temples, a dull headache pulsing just behind his eyes. Bills had stacked up again. Rent was due in 4 days. The center paid, sure, but not enough, not yet. He opened the door, stepped out into the brittle morning light, and that's when he saw it. An envelope, plain, white, tucked beneath the wiper blade like a forgotten receipt. Michael pulled it free, hesitating. No name, no note, no markings. Inside, cash, 50s, a thick stack of them. He stared at it, fingers frozen, heart beating faster than he liked. Someone had left this for him, quietly, deliberately, and he didn't need a signature to know who. He glanced around the empty street, scanned the quiet sidewalk, but no one was watching. Still, it felt like someone was. He climbed into the cab again, the envelope sitting heavy in his lap like a question he didn't know how to answer. Serena, of course it was her. He could see her now, dropping it off in the early dark, convincing herself it was kindness and not charity. He didn't touch the cash again, didn't count it. Just stared at it like it might explain itself. Michael had taken help before, quiet favors from neighbors, a free sandwich from the diner when times were thin, but this felt different. It was a gift with a shadow. Not out of pity, not exactly, but something close. And yet, a part of him knew she meant well. He drove to the center without turning on the radio, just the sound of the road and the envelope shifting in the glove box. He didn't mention it that day, not to Serena, not to anyone. But later that night, he placed it on the table beside the rent notice and walked away. It sat there like a decision waiting to be made. The office was silent except for the soft hum of a desktop monitor left idle and the ticking of a wall clock Serena had never actually paid attention to until now. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the sleek furniture and sharp lines of a life built to impress. Serena sat at her desk perfectly still. Her phone was off. Her inbox was full. Her calendar blinked with reminders she had no intention of honoring. She had closed the door 30 minutes ago, maybe more. Outside, the city moved without her. Horns, heels, espresso machines, schedules ticking forward with ruthless efficiency. But in here, everything had slowed. Or maybe it had finally caught up. She didn't see it coming. One moment she was reviewing quarterly forecasts. The next, she was gripping the edge of her desk as if it might keep her from unraveling completely. Tears came without permission, not the delicate kind, silent, dignified, easy to wipe away. These were deep, guttural sobs that tore through her like something breaking loose. She turned her chair away from the glass walls, burying her face in her hands like a child, as if the mere sight of the city watching would shatter what little was holding her together. The grief had been building, not just the pressure from the board or the whispers in the hallway about her distractions. It wasn't just about the center, or Michael. It was everything. The years she spent proving herself, the cold victories, the choices she'd made without really understanding their cost, and the aching, echoing realization that all the rooms she'd fought to enter had only made her feel more alone. She didn't know what this feeling was exactly. It wasn't failure, it wasn't regret. It was something unnamed, something that only surfaced in quiet offices on mornings like this, when the armor slipped and no one was watching. Her shoulders shook. Her breath hitched, and for the first time in years, Serena Westbrook let herself feel everything she'd tried so hard to outrun. The bike looked like it had lost a fight with a train. Bent frame, chain rusted solid. One pedal gone, the other barely hanging on. The handlebars were twisted at an angle that made it look like the thing was trying to surrender. Michael stared at it, arms crossed, while a boy with buzzed hair and nervous eyes stood nearby, biting the inside of his cheek. "Where'd you find it?" Michael asked. The boy shrugged. "Dumpster, behind the grocery store. Figured maybe—" He trailed off, not finishing the thought. Michael sighed, kneeling beside the wreck. He gave the rear wheel a spin. It didn't move. "I don't think this one's coming back," he said gently. "Might be better to strip it for parts." The boy nodded, trying not to look disappointed, but his shoulders sagged. Then Emily piped up from behind the tool bench, her hands covered in grease. "That's what you said about the green one." Michael turned. "Yeah, and it still doesn't steer right." "But it rolls," she said, marching over to the twisted frame, like it owed her something. "Let's at least try." The boy looked up, hope flickering behind his eyes. Michael hesitated, then exhaled and grabbed his toolbox. "All right, kid. Let's see what we can do." They worked for hours. The bent frame had to be heated and nudged back into place with careful pressure and a rubber mallet. The chain was soaked in oil and scrubbed with wire brushes until the rust let go. Michael showed the boy how to remove a gear cassette, how to true a wheel with patience and a little stubbornness. Emily ran between them like a foreman, handing tools and offering encouragement. By the end of the afternoon, the bike still looked rough, paint chipped, one grip missing, scratches like battle scars. But it moved. The boy climbed on, pedaled once, then twice, and it held. He whooped, a real from-the-gut shout of joy. Michael smiled, wiping his brow. Emily beamed up at him. Told you it was worth trying. And in that moment, surrounded by sweat, busted tools, and one nearly hopeless frame, Michael remembered something he hadn't felt in a long time. Sometimes the things that look most broken just need someone who won't give up. The rain started soft, just a whisper on the windows, but within minutes it became a full chorus, drumming against the roof of the car like it had something to prove. The streets shimmered under the streetlights, slick and silver, as Serena gripped the steering wheel and squinted through the blur of wipers working overtime. Michael sat in the passenger seat, jacket damp from the sprint to the car. Emily was in the back, curled into her seat with her knees tucked under her, watching raindrops race across the glass like tiny, determined swimmers. No one spoke. No music played. And yet the silence wasn't empty. It had weight, not tension, but something unspoken, something forming. Serena kept her eyes on the road, but she could feel Michael glancing at her now and then. Not studying, not judging, just present. And that, somehow, made the air feel different. He cleared his throat once, thought better of speaking, then leaned his head back against the seat with a quiet sigh. Emily broke the stillness with a soft voice. "It smells like rain in here." Serena smiled faintly. "It's one of my favorite smells." "Mine, too," Michael said. "Always reminds me of being a kid. No matter how bad the day was, if it rained, it felt like the world hit pause." Serena's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. She didn't have childhood rain stories, just glass buildings and private drivers who never spoke unless asked to. But this pause, they were in it now. They turned onto a side street, the trees overhead filtering the glow of the city into something gentler. Water streamed down the gutters. The wipers creaked. Still, no one asked for music. At a red light, Serena finally spoke. "I used to hate driving in the rain, but this doesn't feel so bad." Michael glanced over at her. His eyes weren't guarded this time. "That's because we're not rushing anywhere." They pulled up to the curb outside his place, and Michael turned to thank her. But for a moment, neither of them moved. The engine idled, the storm kept going. And something unnameable sat between them, warm and real. No goodbyes, no promises. Just a shared quiet, and the sound of rain doing what it always does best, making space for something to begin. The garage wasn't much to look at from the outside, a crooked door with chipped paint, a single hanging bulb that flickered when the wind hit just right. The driveway was cracked and narrow, tucked behind Michael's modest house where weeds grew between the concrete like they belonged there. But Serena followed him anyway, stepping carefully in heels she now regretted wearing, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders as the evening chill settled in. Michael opened the garage door with a grunt. It groaned in protest, rising slowly to reveal what could only be described as controlled chaos. Bikes leaned against every wall, some halfway restored, others gleaming like new. A workbench sat in the corner, littered with tools, coffee mugs, and a half-eaten granola bar that looked a day too old. A string of mismatched Christmas lights stretched across the ceiling, casting the space in soft, uneven color. Serena took a cautious step inside, her eyes sweeping the room. "It's humble," she said finally. Michael let out a quiet laugh, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, that's the polite word." She turned to him. "You really fixed all of these?" He nodded, walking over to a silver cruiser with purple handlebars. "This one came in with 2 wheels and a frame. Nothing else. Took me 2 weeks. The girl who rides it now hasn't stopped smiling since." She wandered to another, a mountain bike with a faded blue frame and mismatched tires. And this one? Belonged to a kid who said nothing in his life ever worked. Not school, not home, not his bike. So I made this one work. Serena said nothing, her hand gently resting on the seat. Michael looked around the cluttered space, then back at her. "I know it doesn't look like much. But this is everything to me. It's where I come to breathe." She turned to face him fully, her expression softer than usual. "It's more than everything. It's proof." He raised an eyebrow. "Proof of what?" "That broken things can still be whole again," she said quietly. And in that flickering garage, surrounded by second chances and worn-out parts, Serena Westbrook saw the beauty in the mess for the very first time. The fundraiser buzzed with polite conversation, clinking glasses, and the faint echo of a jazz trio playing just off stage. The community center had never looked more elegant. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, tables dressed in white linens, and kids darting between adults like joy in motion. Serena moved through the room like a practiced host, smiling, nodding, exchanging handshakes, and making introductions with ease. She wore navy tonight, simple but sharp, her hair pinned up in a way that made her look even taller. A walking headline. Michael stood by the punch bowl, uncomfortable in the one suit he owned. The tie Emily had picked out was a little too bright, and his shoes pinched, but he didn't fidget. He watched Serena from across the room, marveling at how she shifted from one world to another without missing a beat. But when she spotted him, something softened. She crossed the room slowly, the music dipping into a slower rhythm, as if the moment had been planned. "You clean up well," she said, holding out her hand. Michael hesitated, then took it. She led him to the dance floor, a space no bigger than a parking spot, but it felt like a stage. Couples swayed nearby, and eyes turned to them, curious, surprised. He placed one hand at her waist, the other in her hand. The music wrapped around them, smooth and unhurried. "I haven't danced since," he began, then stopped. "It's okay," Serena said softly. Just move with me." They did. The world shrank. Voices faded. It didn't matter that people were watching. It didn't matter that some of them whispered. In that moment, it was just two people from different stories moving to the same beat. He stepped on her toe once. She laughed, quick and genuine. "Sorry," he whispered. "Don't be," she replied, leaning just a little closer. "I think this is the first time I've felt normal in a long time." As the music swelled and faded, they kept moving. Slow, steady, real. And for those few minutes, the fundraiser wasn't about money or headlines or public approval. It was about something quieter, something beginning. The offer came in a thick envelope, crisp and official, handed to Michael by a man in a gray suit who didn't bother pretending to care why the bikes in the center's shed squeaked less than they used to. Michael opened it in the quiet of the break room, Emily's drawing taped to the fridge behind him, and Serena's laughter echoing faintly from the courtyard where she was helping serve lemonade. He read the first few lines twice, then set it down and rubbed the back of his neck. Vice President of Community Engagement. Relocation package, 6 figures, travel stipends, company car. It was everything he'd never had, everything they said a man like him should want. Serena didn't know yet. She hadn't mentioned it, hadn't pressured him, but Michael knew it had come from somewhere high up. Someone saw what he was doing here, the kids fixing more than just handlebars, the volunteers growing in number, the shed-turned workshop with walls now covered in thank you notes. They saw results. What they didn't see was the why. He walked out to the courtyard, found Serena by the garden boxes, a smear of dirt on her hand and a half-drunk lemonade on the table beside her. "Got a job offer today," he said, the envelope tucked under his arm. She looked up, surprised. "From where?" "Your people." Her brows lifted slightly. "I didn't know they moved that fast." "They offered me everything," he said. "Title, salary, perks I didn't even know existed." "And?" she asked carefully. Michael looked around. The kids running with bikes, the mural being painted on the center's far wall, the beat-up cruiser he and Emily had fixed last week, now in full use by a kid with the loudest laugh in town. "I said no." Serena blinked. "Why?" He turned back to her, voice steady. "Because I don't fix spreadsheets. I fix things that matter. And this?" He gestured around them. "This matters." For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Serena smiled, not the tight, polished kind, but something softer, grateful, proud. And in that quiet, Michael knew he hadn't just refused a job, he'd chosen a life. The cabin was nothing like Michael expected. Tucked behind a line of old pines and perched at the edge of a wide, still lake, it wasn't the glossy kind of weekend home you'd find in magazines. It was quiet, weathered, real. Wood creaked beneath their feet. The screen door moaned every time it opened. There was no Wi-Fi, no sleek automation, just a fireplace that smelled like stories, and a porch with a view that could slow your heartbeat. Serena had invited them without overthinking it. "You two need a break," she'd said, almost casually. "So do I." Emily, of course, had packed within minutes. Her pink backpack was stuffed with snacks, books, and a jar for important rocks. They arrived late Friday, and by Saturday morning, Michael found himself standing at the edge of the dock, coffee in hand, watching Emily giggle as she threw stone after stone into the lake. She was terrible at skipping them, but it didn't matter. Every splash was a triumph. Serena appeared beside him, her flannel shirt sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, eyes clearer than he'd ever seen them in the city. "She's getting better," she said, nodding toward Emily. Michael smiled. "She thinks the water listens better if she talks to it first. Maybe she's right." He looked at her then, not the CEO, not the woman in charge, but just Serena, with bare feet, soft laughter, and something unspoken in her eyes. Later that day, they hiked a short trail behind the cabin. Emily collected leaves and named them things like crinkle leaf and dragon bark. Michael and Serena walked slowly, not needing to fill the silence. When Serena tripped slightly on a root, she grabbed his arm. He didn't pull away. That night, after Emily fell asleep curled up with a flashlight and a book she didn't finish, Michael stepped onto the porch and found Serena already there, wrapped in a blanket, watching the moon skim the lake. He sat beside her, and for a while neither of them said a word. Then she whispered, "I don't want this to end." He didn't answer right away, just reached over and took her hand, letting the lake hold the rest. The argument didn't start with yelling. It started with a silence that lasted too long. They sat on the porch, the night warm but restless, cicadas buzzing like electricity in the air. Emily had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day of hiking and skipping stones. The lake was still, but the space between Michael and Serena had shifted. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the gravel driveway like it might give him a better answer than she could. She was curled in the porch chair beside him, arms crossed, not out of anger, but defense, maybe fear. "I don't need saving," he said quietly. Serena looked over, unsure where this was coming from. "That's not what I'm doing." "You brought us here. You fixed up the center. You left cash on my windshield, Serena." Her face tightened. "I didn't think you'd take it." "I didn't." "I know." The silence that followed was sharp, brittle. He stood and walked a few paces, stopping at the edge of the porch. "Every time things start to feel good, I wonder when the rug's going to get pulled, and then I look at you with all your plans, and I start to feel like maybe I'm just another project." Serena rose slowly. "You think I'm here because you're broken?" He didn't answer. She stepped closer, not angry, but fierce. "You think I left my boardroom and my spotless life because I needed something to fix? Michael, I'm not here because you're broken. I'm here because for the first time in years, I'm the one who's been found." He turned to her, jaw clenched. "Then why does it feel like I'm the one who has to change to keep up?" Serena blinked, hurt flashing through her eyes. "Maybe because you keep running every time someone gets close." He didn't have a response, and neither did she. They stood there inches apart, hearts louder than the night around them. Then Serena stepped back. He didn't stop her. The porch, which had once felt like a beginning, now held nothing but quiet. It was well past midnight when the knock came. Michael was awake, sitting at the kitchen table, the house dim except for the soft yellow glow of the over-the-sink light. Emily was asleep in her room, the hum of her small fan drifting through the hallway like a lullaby. He hadn't expected anyone. Not now, not after the porch. He opened the door slowly, not sure what he'd find. There she was. Serena. Hair slightly windblown, shoes in her hand, a paper bag balanced against one hip, and a blanket draped over her arm. No makeup, no shield, just Serena. "I brought dumplings," she said, voice barely louder than the crickets, "and the blanket from the cabin." Michael didn't move, didn't speak. "I couldn't sleep," she added, softer now, "and I didn't want to fix anything. I just wanted to be here." That was all. No grand apology, no speech. He stepped back, and she took it as the answer it was. In the kitchen, they sat on the floor. Not the table, not the couch, the floor. Backs against the cabinets, chopsticks clicking against the takeout containers. They ate in quiet bites, knees brushing occasionally, breathing sinking without trying. "I'm not trying to fix you," she said finally. "I know. I'm not good at this," she whispered. He looked at her then. Not the polished woman from the boardroom, not the poised one from the fundraiser, just her. Bare, brave. "Me neither," he admitted. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the blanket now over both of them, the takeout containers forgotten on the floor. Outside, the world kept turning. Inside, nothing moved but their breathing. There were still things to say, still wounds to name. But not tonight. Tonight she came back, and he let her in. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where the world feels softer somehow. The sun slanted through the dusty windows of the workshop, casting long golden lines across the floor. Most of the kids were still at home, the center still locked up for the day, but Serena had shown up early anyway, holding 2 coffees and a look that said she was up to something. Michael raised an eyebrow when she handed him the cup and walked straight past him to the workbench. "What are you doing?" he asked, still halfway into his jacket. "I'm fixing a bike," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Michael blinked. "You... what?" She didn't respond, already dragging a rusted little number from the corner. Pink frame, 1 wheel, and a seat that had clearly lost a battle with time. Tools clattered onto the bench beside her, her movements confident, if not exactly coordinated. Michael leaned against the wall, sipping his coffee. "All right, then." For 10 full minutes, he watched in quiet amusement as she tried. She used the wrong wrench twice, pinched her finger once, and cursed under her breath 3 times, each time softer than the last. She loosened the brake cable, tightened it again, and accidentally removed a piece she wasn't supposed to touch at all. When she stepped back to admire her progress, the entire front wheel clattered to the ground. Michael burst out laughing. Serena froze, grease on her cheek, arms crossed. "Don't say it." "I'm not saying anything," he said, grinning like a man who knew better than to poke a bear. "But that bike's more confused now than it was when you started." She groaned. "I don't get it. I followed what you showed me." He walked over, kneeling beside the frame. "You tried to fix it all at once. That's not how it works. You start with one part, get that right, then you build from there." Serena looked down at him, breathing a little harder than she'd realized. "That sounds like a metaphor." "It usually is," he said, gently turning the bike upright again. "Now come on. Let's try it again, together this time." And as their hands met over the handlebars, Serena smiled. Not because she got it right, but because someone was finally showing her how to start again. The email hit Serena's inbox at 6:14 a.m., sharp, cold, and final. Funding denied. No explanation beyond strategic redirection of resources and focus on scalable community ventures. The board had voted, quietly, without her. The same people who had once praised her for thinking outside the box now wanted the box sealed, labeled, and stored, somewhere far from risk. By 7:30 she was at the center, pacing the workshop floor while Michael read the message over her shoulder. "So that's it?" he asked, jaw tight. "I have a week," she said, arms crossed. Then we locked the doors. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Emily wandered in, sleepy-eyed and still clutching a piece of toast. "What's wrong?" Serena forced a smile. "Just a grown-up problem, sweetheart." Emily frowned, then looked at Michael. "Are we still fixing bikes today?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course we are." Word spread fast. By noon, the whispers had reached every corner of town. The center was shutting down. The place that had become a second home for half the neighborhood's kids was about to disappear. But something unexpected happened. By the end of the day, a local shop owner had brought by a jar stuffed with cash. "From the tip jar," he said. "Use it." A teacher from the elementary school stopped in with a folded check and tears in her eyes. "You don't know how many of my students count on this place." One by one they came, parents, volunteers, old men who hadn't ridden a bike in decades, but remembered what it felt like to be seen. They brought food, coins, stories. The mayor's assistant dropped off an envelope from the city's discretionary fund. "Unofficially," she said, "the mayor owes you one." By Friday, the whiteboard in the front lobby read, "Donations needed to stay open, $12,000. By Saturday morning, it read, "Donations received, $13,742. Michael stood beside Serena, arms folded, staring at the number like it might vanish. Serena wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, laughing softly. "I thought we were alone in this." Michael shook his head. "You forgot. We build things that matter." And this town, it showed up not because someone asked, but because someone didn't have to. The offer came wrapped in polite words and a polished handshake. An opportunity from a bigger nonprofit downtown, one with high ceilings, clean funding streams, and a shiny new facility that didn't leak when it rained. Michael had been invited to tour it. Just a quick look, they'd said. No pressure. But as he walked the gleaming halls, lined with motivational posters and rows of identical bikes polished to perfection, something in him felt off. It was too clean, too quiet, too safe. The offer was generous, more than he'd ever made. A salary with benefits, paid vacation, resources that could have made his work easier. They wanted him to run their new mechanics program, structure it, teach it, elevate it. But they didn't know him. They hadn't seen the shed when it still had a leaky roof and a box of mismatched bolts. They hadn't watched Emily draw fairies on the storage cabinets or seen Serena cry in the hallway after the funding was pulled. They hadn't seen the things that mattered. That evening, Michael walked back into the center. The kids were loud again, arguing over who got the purple helmet, someone yelling about missing brakes, music playing from someone's cracked phone speaker. The walls were still uneven. The floor still squeaked in that one spot. And he smiled. Serena was at the front desk sorting through paperwork, a pencil stuck behind her ear. She looked up when he walked in. "Well?" He didn't hesitate. "I said no." Her eyes searched his. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," he said simply. "They had everything except this." She didn't ask what this meant. She didn't need to. Michael crossed the room and leaned on the counter, watching as two kids fought over a socket wrench, and Emily tried to referee with a glitter sticker sheet. "This is home now," he said. "Not because it's perfect, but because it's real." Serena reached out and squeezed his hand gently, and in that small, wordless gesture, Michael knew he hadn't just turned down a job. He'd chosen a place where what he built didn't just work, it mattered. The smell of fresh paint lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of chain grease and sawdust. The kids had been buzzing about it all week, something about a surprise, something about a new name. Michael tried not to read into it. He figured it was a thank you banner or a cake with too much icing. He wasn't expecting a sign. Serena stood beside him that morning, arms folded, her smile quiet and proud. Emily danced in circles near the front door, trying to keep a secret she wasn't very good at keeping. "Close your eyes," she said, tugging on Michael's hand. "It's better if you don't peek." He gave in, let her lead him outside, chuckling under his breath. When the others called out, "Okay, open them," he blinked at the sight before him. Above the double doors of the newly finished bike shop space, hanging from sturdy hooks and framed in reclaimed wood, was a bold sign with hand-carved letters, "Turner and Westbrook Bike Haven. Built with grit, powered by hope." Michael stared at it. The air caught in his throat. Serena stepped closer, voice low. "I know you don't love the spotlight, but you built this, Michael. You gave it its heart." He turned to her. "So did you." Emily chimed in, arms spread wide like she was unveiling a masterpiece. "We voted on the name. The kids all agreed it should be both of you." Michael looked at the sign again, then at the group of kids and volunteers gathered around. Some had grease on their cheeks, others were clapping, grinning, trying to act casual. And for a long moment he just stood there, taking it in. Not the sign itself, but what it meant. It wasn't about ownership, it wasn't about recognition, it was about being seen, being part of something. Serena slipped her hand into his. He didn't let go. The door swung open behind them, and a kid shouted, "All right, who's ready to ride?" Michael smiled. "Let's get to work." Because now it wasn't just a shop, it was theirs. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind of day no one would ever circle on a calendar. The center had closed for the night, the lights dimmed, the tools packed away. Michael and Serena sat on the back steps, sharing the last of a lukewarm coffee, the air still warm with the tail end of summer. The moon hung low above the rooftops, and from somewhere down the street came the sound of laughter, kids biking home late, their wheels clicking into the night. Michael held something small in his hand, wooden, worn. He turned it over with his thumb, tracing the grooves he'd carved over the last few nights in the quiet moments after Emily fell asleep. Serena was talking about something, plans for the fall, maybe a new after-school program, but she stopped when she noticed his silence. He offered her the object, palm open, a bike bell, hand-carved, sanded smooth, simple, not flashy, not store-bought, just real. She took it gently, eyes scanning its details. On the top he'd etched two tiny initials, T and a W. Her breath caught. "No ring?" she teased, though her voice had gone soft. Michael shrugged. "You already got the center." She laughed, quietly, but it filled the air around them like music. Then he looked at her, all humor fading. "I don't have a speech, don't really have a plan, but I was thinking—" He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe we could ride through life together." Serena stared at him. No walls, no corporate polish, just her heart suddenly wide open. "I don't need a speech," she whispered. "I just needed that." She leaned in, rested her forehead against his, the bike bell still clutched in her hand. No audience, no flowers, just the creak of the steps beneath them and the hum of possibility stretching into the night. And as they sat there hand in hand, neither of them needed to say yes out loud. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it just rings quietly, and rings true. The center hadn't changed much on the outside, still the same wide doors with the carved wooden sign, still the same paint-chipped ramp leading up to the entrance. But inside the place had grown, not just in size, but in soul. Walls were covered in photos, kids fixing bikes, kids riding them, kids laughing beside volunteers who once walked in just as uncertain. The workshop had expanded to 3 rooms. There was a classroom now, a scholarship wall, a plaque that read, "Turner and Westbrook Bike Haven, built with grit, powered by hope." Emily Turner stood at the front of the group, clipboard in hand, a whistle around her neck and grease on her palms, just like her father used to have. She was taller now, older, but still had that familiar glint in her eyes, the one that said she knew this place like she knew the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The tour group, 10 kids from a neighboring town, walked behind her, chattering and pointing at tools hung neatly on the wall. "So who built all this?" one boy asked, wide-eyed. Like, who started it? Emily smiled, pausing by the row of refurbished bikes lined up for the weekend ride.
"My dad," she said simply, "and a woman named Serena. But it really started long before this building."
She walked over to a display on the far wall. Under glass, mounted like a relic, was a frayed piece of string tied in a loop. Below it, a handwritten note in faded marker, "The first repair." Emily tapped the glass gently. "It began with a busted bike in the park," she told them. "My dad didn't have tools that day, just string and patience, and a heart that couldn't walk past someone who needed help." The group went quiet, as if understanding something bigger than bikes. Emily stepped back, her eyes drifting to the photo beside the string. Her dad, younger, grinning with a wrench in hand, Serena beside him laughing. "And from that string," Emily whispered, "he built a place where people, no matter how broken, learned they could ride again." The kids didn't say anything. They didn't have to. They just followed her forward into the place that hope built.